know that Kate told me not to read all of her bio, but I have the micro. So I'm going to go ahead and read the whole thing. It's really not that long. So Dr. Kate McCord has dedicated her life to helping others as a nurse, ethicist, nursing leader, and volunteer. In her more than 55 years of nursing, she has cared for critically ill patients and grew into leadership roles where she can influence patient outcomes and improve lives. The last 7 years of her career were spent as a chief nurse executive of a multi-hospital system at Penrose-St. Centura Health system here in Colorado Springs. Kate's notable accomplishment includes implementing a No One Dies Alone program, chairing an ethics committee for more than 10 years, also establishing both the pain and palliative care services, organizing shared leadership on nursing units, and teaching leadership and management as an associate professor at Riggs University in the RN to BSN program. Kate has shared her wisdom and experience with public speaking. Topics include critical care and caring for the critically ill patient, financial management of hospitals, values and leadership, basic ethics, and ethics of medical utility. As Kate's career began to wind down, she was not ready to slow down at all. She received her PhD in healthcare ethics from Duquesne University, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 2017, and used this knowledge and learning to continue to grow and give back. In her retirement, Kate continues to serve others through volunteering. She is a Eucharistic minister for hospital patients, assisted living residents in the home. She also volunteers for hospice as well as evergreen Christian outreach where the underserved in the community receive food, clothing, and shelter. Kate served on the VA Hospital Ethics Committee in Denver and presently as a member of St. Anthony's Hospital Ethics Committee in Denver, Colorado. Kate has also worked with survivors of domestic violence. Kate's philosophy has always been to deliver mission-critical results while serving others. One of her favorite quotes is from Florence Nightingale, where there are none who were discontented with what they have, the world would never reach anything better. So we're really privileged to have Kate speaking on ethics. So I'm going to turn this over to her.
Okay, thank you. It's my privilege to be here today. So, ethics really matter. I think they do. Are we be here today? This will be my topic. Okay, so why do we teach ethics? Why do we talk about it? Certainly, it's not going to make you all more ethical. So that's why you came today and the free lunch, of course. Then I would advise you to finish eating and you can leave because I am not going to help you be more ethical. Not on it. So I wish it was just as simple as this, that we could just pass the ethics around or ask for it or nudge it on to somebody when they're in need of ethics, as we know sometimes that people really are. But ethics are taught really for several reasons. First one is financial, and that isn't so somebody can make more money, or you all aren't going to get paid here today for coming to learn a little bit about ethics. But because there have been so many things in our country, I'm sorry, I don't like the equity here. So I keep moving it down, but I'm afraid I'm trying. But because there's been so many things surrounding around financial things, corrupt things that have happened in our country, that maybe if we sort of impregnate ethics into our world, that maybe will help lessen that. The other reason, to give tools to people so that they can help with ethical decisions. Third one is to help instill critical thinking to help along that journey of ethical thinking. And then the next one is to expose people to critical ethical dilemmas. So we'll get an ethical dilemma today. Maybe it will just expose you a little bit to that. And then a stable society. We've all worked around or been around people that maybe are not particularly ethical, or we have seen people, or I hesitate to say government, but some government would question whether they are performing at the highest ethics that we see. But maybe if more people were sort of dilute society, that maybe we'd see more ethical behavior. And the last is the afterlife. For those people that have a strong religious, they believe that if you do good in your life, that your afterlife will be a more positive. Okay? So now, this is just a nonsensical tool, and I want you to look, and it's the orange page on the table. So just curate this for a moment. Okay, it's just a little story. Maybe here, enough. Another one over here, some more up here. So here, there's some more. Okay, so this is the story about 5 people. Just do this for yourself for a minute. We'll run through it. There was a woman named Abigail who was in love with a man named Gregory. Gregory lived on the opposite side of the same river. Now, the river separating these 2 lovers was a dangerous one and was teeming with alligators. Abigail wanted to get over to see Gregory for fun, but the bridge had washed out, raging floods. So she went to ask Sinbad, who was a riverboat captain, to take her across the river. Now, Sinbad said he wouldn't do it unless she would consent to go to bed with him for the voyage. She promptly refused and went to her friend named Ivan to explain her dilemma. Ivan did not want to get involved at all in the situation. So Abigail felt that her only alternative was to take Sinbad up on his deal. Sinbad fulfilled his promise. Abigail was delivered into the arms of Gregory. Now, when she told Gregory about her amorous escapade in order to cross the river, Gregory cast her aside with disdain. Heartsick and rejected, Abigail turned to Slug with her tale of woe. Now, Slug, feeling compassion for Abigail, sought out Gregory and beat him brutally. Abigail was overjoyed at the sight of Gregory getting his just due. As the sun set on the horizon, you could hear Abigail laughing at Gregory. Now, just for a moment, in your own mind of those 5 people, Abigail, Gregory, Sinbad, Ivan, and Slug, in your own mind, just who is the most despicable? Who is the most despicable? Okay, so how many of you think Abigail is the most despicable? Just raise your hand. Okay, everyone. How many think Gregory is the most despicable? 3, 4, 5. Okay, how many think Ivan is the most despicable? There. How many think Sinbad is the most despicable? 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so far Sinbad has it. How many think Slug is the most despicable? Okay. Now, I said this is a nonsensical little game. But again, if we're going to take the time, we can talk about, and why do you think that? Why? Certainly, Abigail did whatever she could to get her way. Gregory, he wasn't trying to get across the river. Ivan didn't want any part of it. Sinbad was an opportunist. Slug was looking for a fight. So for me, it's Ivan. Because Ivan didn't want to get involved, and I have no tolerance for anyone that doesn't get involved and doesn't want to come up and show up and be there. Now, if you peel that onion away, you probably find that somewhere in my life, somebody wasn't there for me. They didn't deliver. They're not always coming around. So because of that, and all of that, my values in this life are to be there for people, show up, and to have always see somebody come on board. So this was a little tricky and not scientific way to say, if we looked at why you thought somebody, maybe if we peel the onion back, see what your underlying values might be. Again, as I say, not scientific. So, what are we going to talk about today? Okay, we're going to talk briefly about some definitions, just so we all start at the same place. We're going to talk about Daniel's Fund Ethics Initiative. Don't know about it. We'll briefly talk about that. We're going to talk biomedical ethics principles. Then we're going to talk about ethical decision making. What's that involved? We're going to look at a case presentation that will bring it all together. Then I'm going to give you some takeaways that you may take with you out the door. Maybe that's all you take away, and that's okay too. Just some things that I hope you will take with you to move on. So let's start with our definitions. First and foremost, we'll start with ethics. What is ethics anyway? Well, it's a field of philosophy. So it's sort of high in the sky. It's not basically concrete, but it's as ancient as man itself. And really, the first person that sort of put it into words was Aristotle back in the 4th century or in the 300s, when he sort of gave it some concreteness. But basically, it's a way of life. If you look at definitions, you'll find it, well, it's about the right versus the wrong, making the right choices, doing the right thing, doing the good thing. As I say, it started with man itself. And as man began to develop, it started with the law of nature, and then man freed himself from the law of nature. And as that happened, then it needed to, he got his own free will. As soon as man got his own free will, then he had to be accountable for his actions. And as soon as he became accountable for his actions, there had to be some rules. And suddenly they were all doing all sorts of things, and things weren't always right. So then we had to have rules, and somebody had to be accountable for those rules, and then we had laws and all of that. So that's sort of the evolution of man, and sort of how ethics then developed in that course of that time frame, and how our whole evolution happened. The next one is about values. It shows the evolution of the word ethics. Ethics really comes from the Greek word ethos, or the whole science of morals. Next one is values. Values is really the foundation of ethical behavior. Now, our values are subjective. They're emotional. They're ours. They can change. They can be destructive. They're our why for our behavior. Sort of the map that chooses us the way we go. Where did we get them? Not on the internet. We got them starting with our family as we grew up, branched out with our school, with our friends, with our culture, with our religion. As we got into the workplace, we picked up values, we ditched some values. So they're ours. Okay? They can be chosen or not. So then what are principles then? Okay? Principles are more objective as opposed to value subject. They're more factual, they're more firm, they're more stable, they're more rules that are given. They're permanent and they govern our consequences. Now, they're based on facts. They tend to not be as destructive as values. So then what is a theory? Well, theory is a set of principles. Okay? It's a set of principles which the practice of an activity is based. Set of principles on which the practice of an activity is based, like nursing theory, like education theory, like adult learning theory of relativity. So, if we apply values and principles and theory together, then we get these two moral actions. I'll get over this for a second. So we have moral action. First is actions which are right and obligatory. Okay, like truth telling. We say that's right and obligatory, and most of the time that's true. We can always say, well, there are times when we shouldn't. Maybe we should be so detailed. But overall, for the most part, actions that are right and obligatory, truth telling, and of course, stopping at a red light. That's cool. The next one, actions that are wrong and prohibited, like murder. Now, of course, self-defense, wartime, overall, going to kill somebody is wrong and prohibited. Actions that are optional and morally neutral, like playing chess with a friend, or playing a game with a child or grandchild. Those are optional, morally neutral. Actions that are optional but morally praiseworthy. If I donate my kidney, my sibling. Now, really raise it up a notch. I donate a lobe of my liver to a total stranger. Okay. That really comes up a notch. Okay. So let's talk then about this Daniel's. ethics initiative collegiate program. How many have heard of Daniel's Fund? Right. All right, so then this will be just a review for you. Bill Daniels was a decorated fighter in World War II and the Korean War. Then he became a very astute and successful businessman, accruing over $1 billion in his lifetime. He died in 2000. He actually established his headquarters and business here in Denver. But in the process of his business, he also was the owner of the LA Lakers and founded the U.S. football team. But he found that he really believed that ethics was more than just being trustworthy, but it was the whole foundation for him for being successful in business. And he felt he needed to do something about that. So he wanted to incorporate that into the learning process for the college learner. And so he was developing this process prior to his death in 2000. But what started out as 8 colleges, universities, and the program actually got launched in 2010 after a pilot for 5 years. And then in 2015, it then went to 11 schools, of which 10 were business and 1 was a law school. Law school was Colorado law, and over 5 states. And so now, Colorado, there are 29 schools. In New Mexico, there are 8. In Utah, there are 7. Wyoming, there are 5. So UCCS is 1. Boulder is 1. Regis is 1. Metro is 1. Those all have that's my life. But he believed that there are certain principles that if we all follow those, that we would be successful not only in business, but in life as well. So there's 8 principles. He wanted those to be taught and incorporated into the collegiate curriculum. Also, the board of directors and their foundation have reached out to the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school, so that they're also touching the lives of those aged children to try to bring these ethical principles and what it is right to really follow an ethical decision-making, ethical lifestyle. Now, I will tell you that this foundation does not accept or seek any donations, private or public. And it is set to go on into perpetuity, which is forever and ever. So it's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome that Colorado is involved with that. So what are those 8 principles? Really common sense, really. So we'll just put them up there with you. Integrity, aisle there. You you act with honesty in all situations. Trust, you build trust in your relationships. Let's back up. Your accountability, accept responsibility for all your decisions. Transparency, open and truthful communication. Fairness, engage in fair communication in all of your actions. Respect, you honor the rights, freedom, and views of others. The rule of law, you certainly comply with all the intentions of the laws and regulations. And viability, you create long-term value for all relevant stakeholders. So that's the Daniels Fund. So like I say, how awesome that we in Colorado get to have that access and get that scholarships. And they do offer scholarships. Now, this foundation, all of that, have touched over 450,000 lives, students and faculty and business people, and still going strong. So anyway, we are with that. Now let's talk a little bit about biomedical ethical principles. Okay, so where did they start from? What caused that to all come about? So let's talk about the history there. That really started with Hippocrates back in the 5th century. And that was really influenced by Islamic scholars and Jewish thinkers. And also in the early 1800s, Thomas Percival, who was an author and a physician, he really felt that there needed to be some sort of requirements, not only for the medical personnel, but for the institutions as well, things that really involved. And so by the middle 1800s, he had also brought in some Catholic ethics, and he also then changed to more liberal thinking, the Protestants. So in the early beginning of medical ethics, we really had the Islamic thinking, the Jewish thinking, the Catholic, and the Protestant. So really, from a medical perspective, it really was heavily based in the beginning on religious thinking from all sorts of the religious founders from the very beginning. So what other ethical things or what other history influenced where we are today? The first one was the Nuremberg Code in 1947, and that was after World War II, after all the atrocities that we discovered that had happened with the Nazis and what they had done with the Jewish people across Europe, and also with other minorities and disabled, and the experiments that they did. So the Nuremberg Code came out, and they said, this is what you have to do with any research on any human subjects due to the necessity of. And then the Declaration of Helsinki in 1964 followed that up and said, okay, you as researchers better be doing your part and do this, blah, 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 blah. After that, Roe versus Wade in 1972, so that had been in place for 52 years until the recent changes, which I won't go into that. And then hemodialysis came along in 1924. Now, that was a great, great discovery. However, there weren't that many hemodialysis machines. So the ethical as to who gets it is to use the hemodialysis machine. Then after that, then gene editing, in the early 1900s that started. Gene editing, what's that going to mean in the future? How they had little knowledge as to where we'd be today. And where that's headed is just beyond even discussion today. Then nursing homes. Florence Nightingale, in the very beginning, the late 1800s, she did a code of ethics through her Nightingale Pledge. And then as that evolved, it went into some of these basic principles that I would talk about is involved in the nursing ethics world as well. And then in the mid-19th century to 20th century, up until then, doctor had been God. And don't go telling anybody, still thinks they are, because I think there's still some hangovers that still think they are. Don't let that get out. But anyway, that sort of changed where the patient said, I've been reading and I've seen this on the internet and I know, and this is the drug I can watch your TV and I want some of this drug. I want this and I want that. And drug companies are spending most of their dollar on research, not on research and development, but on TV ads, because that's where they're getting all their return. Okay, then in the early 20th century, we started with ethics committee and review boards to try to keep things in line. And in 1992, Joint Commission, who accredits hospitals and other health organizations, said, we are now requiring you to have an ethics committee. You better be watching what's going on in your organization. And you better be educating people on the right thing to do. Now, one of the biggest history things that brought ethics to mind has been the COVID and the pandemic in 2020. There's never been ever a challenge like that as to who got what without any formalized rationing. Rationing did occur at the bedside. I will just tell you, there's no other way that they care for patients. So, Tom Bouchon, and I love to say his name, so let me say it several times. Bouchon and James Childress, they're both professors of philosophy. They don't have a medical background, but they're professors of philosophy. Childress is also a professor of theology. He also teaches medical ethics. Now, Tom Bouchon is he's a scholar at the Kennedy Institute of Ethics. So they have a lot of ethics, but they decided that they were going to write a book back in the 70s, early 70s, on the principles of bioethics, the first textbook that's ever been written. It's now in its 8th edition. I have a set of them. I certainly use that in my school program, and they were used all throughout my dissertation. They decided they were going to do something, and they came up with these 4 principles. I'll talk about that in a second. So they've had this book up there for 40 years, but what should we call this ethics stuff? Is it medical? Is it bioethics? Is it healthcare ethics? Is it clinical ethics? What is it? What should we call it? Started with medical, but that tend to bring it in too little. It's all about, it seems like it's all about doctors, and it isn't. It's really more about the whole health. And so they hit on bio, and bio is really the health. It's health related, from bench to bedside. So it includes all of those, whether they're nurses, doctors, pharmacists or administration. It's all about all of those. Okay. So here, see medical affair, one of the early ones, but these are their 4 principles: autonomy, beneficence, non-malfeasance, and justice. And those 4 are incorporated in the nursing ethics, but nursing is added a couple of more: veracity and fidelity. These are the 4 basic principles. So, just as a quick overview, autonomy is respect for persons, or veracity, stuck in there, and that's truth telling. Beneficence, do as much good as you can. Non-malfeasance, do no harm. And justice is distribute health resources fairly. And notice I didn't say equally, I said fairly. And there is a difference. So, why did Tom Bouchon and James Childress really get into this business? You know, were they just sitting around one day and said, I'm thinking I'll write a book. Oh, I think we could. Seems like we know a little bit about stuff. Why should we really do this, you know? I mean, we need to put something, why they get it out there and teach it to the masses. Actually, they were very moved, not only about what went on in Europe, but they suddenly looked in their back door, in our back door, and they were appalled by what they saw. And I'm going to tell you about 5 of them. There were a lot more. I really would like to tell you, Friday, we're going on. And I'm going to start with the first one. This is just both of them. They were looking for the right versus the wrong. The first one was the Tuskegee syphilis study in 1932 and 1972. And it was down in Macon County, Alabama, or Tuskegee, Alabama. Okay, and it started with a group of 600 African American impoverished sharecroppers. Okay, and somebody had told them, and there's a false belief, and this is the United States Public Health Service and the CDC. Did you question? No. Up and coming department of our government. But they were operating in the belief that African American people, when they got syphilis, they took a different course and they wanted to study it. Now, these people were not consented. They weren't even given any facts. They were told that they were just studying some bad blood. Now, I have that picture up in the right-hand corner. Shows that penicillin was there. This was discovered in 1940. By 1943 to 1945, it was available to these people. But they didn't get it because they were looking at syphilis. But of the 600, 400 were given syphilis and 200 were control group. 28 of the men died. 100 from syphilis, 100 died from complications of syphilis. 40 other women were infected. 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. Now, in 1997, the president apologized for what we did to these people. In 1973, there was a class action suit, and they got a $10 million settlement. Was it really enough? Because syphilis can cause blindness and deafness and mental impairment and bone deterioration and heart failure. We can't pay it. No money in the world. So that was one of those cases that Bouchon and Childress said, we got to do something. The next one was started in 1945, but it was in Statesville Penitentiary in Crest Hill, Illinois. And there were a couple other penitentiaries there too. But this one took 200 subjects in a 2-year period. And of the 5, I'm going to tell you, they were consented, but there were no facts to consent. Except they were told that we're going to give you malaria, and you might get bad symptoms. You might die, and some did. And we're going to study some drugs. It was really not studying drugs. See, they started in 1945 when the World War II was waning, still going on in the South Pacific, where they were getting a lot of malaria. And at the time, between 1943 and 45, there were 8 million, they called it like sick days, 8 million sick days, either in a hospital or at home, that they were taking out of the army and the soldiers. 8 million. So they had to do something. See, waging quinine was expensive and hard to get. At the same time, Germany was busy, and they made a synthetic quinine, which was good. Of all things going to Germany, that were producing fast enough. All that stuff. So we're going to look at some other drugs for being made. Very bad. I don't use it all today. So in this picture, they've taken glass bubbles and infected mosquitoes inside, and they would have bites on the abdomen until they've been bitten. They also injected them in the vein, blood. They had them drink blood of malaria patients to see if the digestive system gave them malaria the same way as mosquitoes. And there was no compensation for this. One of the biggest things that happened that was wrong, because that isn't enough, is that the prisoners that were getting this disease, one of the benefits of why they even volunteered is they got their sentence reduced significantly. And if they were under any disciplinary action, that got taken away. But one thing that they failed from the Nuremberg Code perspective is that they had the prisoners that were studying, and then they had those that were studying, but they were prisoners too. And you can't have like the fox watching the hen hatch. And so that sort of negated any results gotten out of that one. Now the next one. This was the mustard gas tested on soldiers. This took 60,000 enlisted soldiers. Black Americans, Japanese Americans, and Puerto Ricans. And this was top secret. Even our upper government didn't know about it. And didn't know about it. And it was done by military to find out what effect mustard had on the skin. If you ever want to look that up, look that up. It's just atrocious. It's worse in some degrees than a thermal burn as to what it does to the skin. This is not one of the soldiers. This is one of the watching soldiers. You can see how they're well protected. And they put them in a wooden gas chamber and they locked the door. They piped the gas in. And then they were screaming. This was declassified in 1993, not until 1993. And what I mean by that, in 1993, it became public, not until then. Because they didn't keep records. Nobody knows who, what, why, or when. So there's no compensation, and that's not consented either. The next one is the United States infected Guatemalans with STDs, and that was done with prisoners also. That started in 1946. They were not informed, nor were they consented. And it was done by bringing prostitutes in, by pouring the bacteria over the genitalia of the male prisoners, pouring it over their face and on their forearms, give them STDs. And that study, their whole aim was to see if penicillin really did work. See if it really did work. And they were given penicillin, but as it turned out, a third of them or more were left untreated. Now, in Guatemala today, there are a little over 17 million people. In that day, there were 15 million people. Today, as then, over half of them live in poverty. Then, they were about fourth grade education level. Today, they're about sixth grade. So we advantage of an impoverished, undereducated population, and didn't even tell them. And the last study, this is the CIA, another one of our government departments. They infiltrated 17 area groups, and they gave out LSD. And this was headed up by the Bureau of Narcotics. And our whole purpose was to see if men, we're talking about men again, if they were given the influence of sex and drugs, if they would tell secrets. Well, hello. If they were given those good things, so they would have the prostitutes take them to the safe house, and then they would observe them behind glass doors, and they were not consented or informed either. And then they would use subliminal to bring information to them about robberies and assaults and assassination attempts and see if they would share that. prostitutes would bring them there and highly spike their drinks with LSD. And just see that would happen. Now Truman found out about this, President late 40s. He said, told him to cease and desist. They didn't do that. They didn't do that on people without them knowing about it. But it appears they didn't stop. In fact, they recruited now from the restaurants and bars and the beaches. And that went on until the 70s. So somebody else found out about it, was a reporter. And he brought out, came out in the news. And then President Ford got involved, set up a president commission and said, is it legal to do what you've been doing? CIA? We wanted the CIA held accountable. And he did a presidential order to see if we could make that happen. And Senator Ed Kennedy formed a commission to see if they could hold the CIA accountable. And he had people to come and testify, and they all backed out at the last minute so that they had in that account. One of the scientists committed suicide, and the family asked for $750,000 in the government, which they received. Now, Neil Bell wrote a book about this called Operation Midnight Climax. He also had a play that was on Broadway. It starred Christine Baranowski, she's Diane Lockhart, and his wife. She also was in a big fight. If you want to read even more, Operation Midnight Climax. So, run this by legal, but sprinted by ethics. I believe that has gone on way in the past. You can see there was some dissatisfaction and appallment as to what had been going on in our own backyard. Now, we hope, as I say, I would like to tell you that doesn't happen anymore. It's not happening today. I can't say that. So let's talk then a little bit more about the principles. Head out a couple of things about autonomy. Autonomy has both a positive and a negative side. Not only do you want a person to really act in an autonomous way, you have to be sure what not to do, as well as what the right thing is to do, given them the full respect. That they have what it takes to give their own decision, that they are fully capable and rational, so that they can do self-determination. And that's where the veracity or the truth-telling. And beneficence, that's doing good, and our intent may be to do good, but it can't be isolated. We also have to prevent harm and remove harm. But in this particular principle, there's a provider responsibility. Ever that person is in, like, talking medical world, but any world really, that you must have current in your knowledge, like if it's a physician, they must know all the latest treatment. It doesn't stop whenever they get out of school. You must always keep current on new procedures, new drugs, new treatments, all of that. They must always be kept out. It's true for any specialty. Okay, now someone said beneficence and non-malfeasance should be one on opposite sides of a coin. But these particular authors didn't see it that way, so they made them separate. Then we have non-malfeasance. The first do no harm. In this case, the harm and the good have to be so that the good is in greater proportion than the harm. Do that. And all medicine, no matter what, it does have some risk. It has to be the least amount. So now let's talk about justice. Aristotle says, justice is really about giving to each which they are due. That doesn't mean equal, but what they are due. So when we talk about justice, we really talk about distributed justice. Who receives what? So let's in our mind talk for a second about COVID and what happened when all of that started back in 2020. Think about that. Equal share. That's one way to decide who gets what. Everybody gets the same piece. Well, that was hard to do when it came time for it all, but that's how we started. There was discussion when it first hit. They weren't going to bring the nursing home people. They weren't going to come into the hospital. They just be treated at home, and they weren't going to come into acute care and take all of our resources. But that's not what happened. They sort of became a first come, first served basis. You came in, you got this, you got that. Or according to effect. If you had patients that came into the hospital with COVID, no vaccine, and they were put on a ventilator, they were put on dialysis, all the treatment and drugs. And there was no effect. They weren't getting any better. In fact, they were maybe getting a little worse. And they were going to stop that treatment. They weren't doing any better, so they could give it to somebody that was. This person over here seemed to be responding better, getting better. They would stay on the treatment. These people were not. That was stopped. So based on effect, according to need. So that's the other thing. This person may come in and they really needed a ventilator, and their kidneys were, they needed dialysis, their kidneys weren't functioning. So they would get those treatments first because they needed it. But if it wasn't giving a positive effect, it wouldn't stay on forever. And according to contribution, and I put that up there because in the real world, I don't see that happening, but I'm going to mention that as an option. You have a 95-year-old patient, you have a 25-year-old patient. They've got potentially another 50 years of contribution to society. This one potentially doesn't. So should this one get more treatment than this one? That's a slippery slope to everyone. Whereas this one may have already contributed a great deal. How do you do that? We don't do that in our world, to my knowledge, but that's certainly something that gets thrown into the mix. Any potential conflict that may be occurring, that's thrown as to who gets what, particularly if there's anything that's legal or illegal or that has to be thrown into the mix. And the last one, competing obligation. I'll throw this out there. I attended a conference, and a speaker was from the University of Centura Health, and he talked about, he's a medical director, but he did talk about the conflict. After the vaccines were out, people got their vaccines or didn't get their vaccines. Then we had another surge. People were coming in very sick. This group chose not to get the vaccine. This group chose to get it. They were very ill because on top of that, they had cancer, they had autoimmune disease and all of that. But these people chose not to get it, but they were competing for the same resources. The physician and nursing staff had a hard time coming to terms with these people getting the same resources that these who had no choice. That was a very difficult time and created great moral stress. It created, unfortunately, some bad things that happened to some of our nursing and physician colleagues by way of suicide rate, unfortunately. That just one of the many things. Okay, now, as we've gone through these, it would be nice if there were signposts along the way that told us when we should go yes or when we should go no. That would be wonderful. We can hope for that, but it's not happening. So what I want to do here is put the Daniel's 8 principles on one side and the medical on the other side, just to sort of give you the fact that they're different, but they're not. So they both talk really about the same thing. I'm not going to really read them to you, but we talk about the same things, about honesty and trust and respectability. And it's basically about doing the right thing. It's about following the law and justice and no harm. So they are. So we talk about what are the main biomedical ethical issues out there today. First of all, the biggest thing is quality of care. What kind of care is being received and all of that, and conflicts of interest. The next is the allocating the limited drugs and equipment. We certainly have had a rush of the lack of drugs like chemotherapy. Sometimes we just don't have a chemotherapy. Somebody's been getting a treatment, now we don't have it any longer. It's been devastating in some of our treatment cases. Addressing the end of life issues. And when I talk about this, it's not just about euthanasia or MAID, M-A-I-D, medical aid in dying. I lost the first second. But because most hospitals don't really engage in that. But when it comes down to a patient that's on a ventilator, withdrawing the ventilator or withholding the ventilator, don't put it on in the first place. Ethically, those terms are neutral. They mean the same. But from a family's perspective, it's much easier to withhold the treatment than to withdraw it. They have a difficult time stopping something than not starting it in the first place. So what I've seen really work the best and was is to do the right thing at the beginning. We're going to try grandpa on this ventilator for 24 hours. After 24 hours, if there's no improvement, we're going to stop it in a way to help that family with that decision. Instead of just plugging along and say, okay, grandpa's not doing any good, let's take him off the ventilator. Family's not prepared, they don't have a date. But if you set the stage and sort of plan that out, I think that works so much better with family. Okay, so the doctor-patient relationship, sometimes that's an issue. The doctor's not talking to me, he comes in, doesn't say a word, there's a lot of conflict, I don't do anything he says. Or, as I've seen so often, and it's still true to this day, the doctors change over. The old days are gone. Family practice doctor would be your doctor in the hospital. Now you get whoever, the hospitalist program or whatever, it's a doctor du jour. And so they come in and you start used to the other one, and I get the other one, and there's conflict. There's also doctor-nurse relationship conflict, particularly in surgery and in the NICU of all places. When I wrote my dissertation, one of my chapters was on moral distress in nurses. It's the highest in NICU. NICU nurses have the highest. The second highest is in the trauma nurses, out on the front line in war zones. They get very high moral distress. So anyway, that, and of course, OR. And then allocating limited donor organs. We're going to talk about donor organs. I would love to talk about organ donation, but and a 2% in miscellaneous flow. So now, we've talked about definitions. We mentioned about the Daniels Fund ethics and and how great it is in Colorado. Now I gave you sort of a historical background of why medical ethics even came to be and those principles and how they're not that unique and different than basic principles of doing the right and wrong. So now let's talk about ethical decision. And ethical decision making, I've been getting annoying pains of conscience when faced with ethical dilemmas. Got anything for that? Yeah, I wish. So this is a model, and it's not unique, and it's things that I put together to just sort of show you tell you that there's not one model out there. It's like sort of like the general science principles when I took that, right? Probably none of it. But it's just basically any model you look at is basically the same model. First thing you do is you look for an ethical issue. You have a dilemma, or you're at a point in your personal or professional life. You look at it, you say, this is an ethical dilemma. This is an ethical issue. Oh, okay. What's the problem? What's the ethical problem? It's an ethical problem. Okay, go to step 2. You gather your facts, look them up, gather them. What are they? Do you have to, in the hospital, do I have to look at charts? Do I have to pass charts? What do I have to do to pull this together? And the third one, identify all involved, get them all around the table. All people, it's great when they face each other. Sometimes that's all it took. You see, the doctors and the families sit down with each other and bingo. Sometimes it was set up right there, done, over and out. And then you identify the values, apply those principles. What's at stake? Is it the autonomous patient? What does the patient want? I would often ask the patient or the family this question: if your dad could talk today, what would he be telling us? To keep him on the ventilator? He didn't write it in advanced practice. You know, what did your dad do for a living? What did he do for fun? This is what he would want. Really get down to those kind of questions. And then identify what are the potential solutions. We could make him happen. Or we could stop him. We could make him, if he does happen to have a cardiac arrest, we could make him a do not resuscitate. Or I like the A and D better, to allow an entry. That seems to be a possibility. And then to act. And sometimes the action is no action. And that may be the action. We're not going to do anything right now. We'll read it. And then I want to just show you what the VA uses. The VA uses the cases approach. And I know integrated ethics is one word, but the cases approach is basically just what I told you. You clarify the issue. What is it? You assemble all those involved. You synthesize your data. You come up with a solution or a potential solution, and then you support the decision and you move around. So that's how that works. So we're going to look at a case presentation with your white sheets. This one you got to work at the table a little bit and together. Now, this one, you're on a hospital ethics committee. So you've been given all your ethics training right now, and so you're ready to take on a case. And this is a 6-year-old daughter. And she has a brain condition called static encephalopathy, which means that it will not improve. So she basically has the physical and mental status of an infant, and that's where she'll stay. Okay, she's an only child, and her parents, the caregivers, have come to the ethics committee because they want some things done for her. Okay, and these things are the first one. They want her daughter to receive high dose estrogen. Now she's 6, but they want her to have that to inhibit the growth of her epiphyseal growth plates. And they're like in our femurs, they're cartilage that enhances the growth until you're in your prepubescent type puberty age, in which time they will eventually stop growing and then they become just fine line. But they want to stop that so she doesn't get any bigger. They want to keep her little, okay? So that they can carry her around, so they can give her hugs, and she can eat at the dinner table easier, and she'll have less bed sores and she'll have less pneumonia, all those things. So they can keep her little. So they really want to stunt her growth, in other words. Now, usually the growth stunts in a female, it's happened as early as 12 years, usually between 14 and 15. In a male, it can happen at 14, but usually 15 to 17. So they want to keep her little. I think that will benefit her, better quality of life. Okay. So that's the first one. The second part, they want to remove her uterus. She won't have a menstrual period and have to deal with that. She'll never understand. And she won't have a menstrual period. And then, if by some chance she has to go to an institution, if by some chance she's in some place and she gets raped, she won't have to deal with that pregnancy and the trauma. If that happens. And then, because there's a history of breast cancer in the family and fibrocystic breast disease, they want to remove her breast buds. Plus, without breasts, it's easier to strap her into some of her strollers and all that. And while they're in there, they just go ahead and do an appendectomy. Because then she won't have appendicitis, but she can tell she. Okay. What I want you to do in just a few minutes amongst yourself, look at those 4 principles: autonomy, beneficence, non-malfeasance, and justice. Does any one of them just say, oh, I think this is what it means, or I think it doesn't mean any of them, or it means all of them? And then, any pros or cons, and then, as an ethics committee, would you say, go for it, or deny the request? I'll give you just about 5 minutes to just talk about that. I'm not going to have anybody stand up and shout out what you think, but talk about that in a few more minutes. Now I will tell you that high dose estrogen is given to some pre-teenage girls that are growing too rapidly. They don't want to grow any taller. That is given as free. And that so far research-wise, that hasn't caused any bad outcomes. But not 6-year-olds, but just very honest. Okay, talking about the ethical principles. Did anybody have any of the 4 come to the forefront? Let's say autonomy. Anybody think that came to the forefront? How about beneficence? Go ahead.
I was going to say, we talked about how she probably will never be able to have any kind of autonomy just with her intellectual function. So,
right, okay. How about beneficence?
We actually kind of thought a little bit of the opposite, that we really don't know how her cognitive ability will progress. Because she's 6 years old. I mean, she could become 8, 9, 10 years old, maybe be 6. I mean, her biological age could progress, but maybe she still have some cognitive that she might gain. We don't know.
So we're told very much she won't, right? But she'll be the infant forever. But I don't know how they do that. But anybody have beneficence? Non-malfeasance? Justice? How many would say approve, go for it? How many denied it? What, did you separate them out?
I did it with mine.
Okay. Which one did you go for?
Well, I was contemplating government. But the second,
situation of creating out the unwanted pregnancy if this is a vulnerable individual. And she gets herself in situations and takes advantage of, cannot take care of the child. So I think that's not.
Okay. And somebody over here, you said, what, mostly I heard no. Right?
Well, we talked about maybe separating, and they really shouldn't all be clumped together.
Okay.
Each request really has numerous things.
Yep.
And you have to look at the options. For instance, removing her uterus to prevent pregnancy. Well, you could, if she does reach puberty, you could do other things like put in an IUD. Not to get too technical, but that, you know, you have to weigh the other options. It's not really like a black and white.
Right.
We had a midwife in
Yeah.
our little group, so.
Yeah, right.
Well, also number 2, also, or the second bullet point, we talked about it. It's a lot of what ifs. What if this, what if that?
Right.
And my thought is, you know, so you go in and you're gonna, you know, take out her uterus. Oh, well, while you're there, just take out her appendix. Oh, and while you're there, why don't you take out her tonsils? And why don't you take out this and take out that? All because you can, not because it's needed. And so it's a wish list of potential problems that may never come to fruition. And so to subject a 6-year-old to what could possibly happen to them when they're 55,
Right.
I think at age 6 is wrong.
Right. Okay, now, this is a real case. Okay. Now, I will tell you, let's just look at, here's the principle. Now, some ethicists, and they weren't just your average Flavanite ethicist. Arthur Kaplan, he is awesome. He's doing a lot in my education. Joel Prater, pediatric ethicist, weighed in on this. They were in agreement. Yeah. And this is what they have to say about that. Let's start with autonomy. Here are the pros on that. Okay, pros. Well, she was treated with dignity and respect, as were her caregivers. Okay. The parents were in agreement that would improve her quality of life. And she could say that was also true. However, they also were concerned because society was not providing enough in the care of the disabled. So that was a pro to do this. The society wasn't doing their part, and to wait for that may not happen for who knows how long. So in a way, that was a pro to move ahead. And Ashley would never know if her uterus was present or absent, or her breast. So in a way, that wouldn't affect Ashley. Now the cons, of course, Ashley herself is not an autonomous being. She isn't able to make those decisions, but she will be for sure a permanent child. It's terminally infantilizing her, or making her permanently an infant, whether that's what she's going to do. This is going to seal the deal, so to speak. It denies her basic respect and dignity because of that. And they really should focus on working with society and not take this other option. That it's a slippery slope. Next it'll be cerebral palsy and traumatic brain syndrome and this and that, and just move on down. It's done really for the benefit of the caregivers and not for the benefit of Ashley. Roundabout it might be, but not directly. And who knows the high effect of estrogen dosage, the high dose effect of estrogen for somebody at 6 years old. So they think it does not meet the principle of autonomy. The next benefit, since they're non-malfeasance. Pro, yes, it might decrease her exposure to pet sores. She's easier to move more a lot. It may decrease her pneumonia risk for the same reasons. That's also true. And appendix removal, okay, so she won't have to worry about appendicitis. So that's a pro. But the con, we don't know that treatment will really be beneficial. Or it hasn't been tested really in somebody quite that young. And the estrogen, we've got blood clots, high lipid profile. Will she have early cardiac disease? Don't know that. Even taking out the uterus, they were leaving the uterus, the ovaries. But that may lead them to malfunction at a younger age, cause more cardiac problems down the road. And Again, what this does to the disabled community is setting a precedent then for society overall. And even though it may decrease the risk for pregnancy, but it's not really a real risk, really is it an overwhelming risk? Is it at the back door? Really, is it? And the breast cancer risk is small. And so overall, does not meet the principle of beneficence and malfeasance. The next one, justice, doesn't really have a pro or con, mostly con. The first one has to do with that she may have been, she may be exploited here. It's not really fair what they're doing. And this feeds into the WPAS. This occurred in Seattle, but the Washington Protection and Advocacy System, which is a private organization that's vested with federal authority to protect the disabled. Washington State also has a law that you cannot sterilize a disabled person without a court advocate. Now, this Washington Society did come to the ethics committee, but the lawyer that was representing the caregivers said that wasn't necessary, so the hospital proceeded without an advocate for Ashley. She had no advocate present. And the parents thought they were their advocate, but they're not. They're intimately involved, and they can't step back and be Ashley's advocate. Plus, what did this do for distributive justice? Where is it for the obligation of the caregivers, and not caregiver parents, but I mean the care providers, for them to do the fair thing in using resources to do this kind of work? So what really happened was that it was done, and the hospital ethics committee approved it. Ethics said no. Ethics reviewed it after the fact. This happened in 2006 in Seattle, Washington. You look it up. It was in Time magazine. She was called the Pillow Angel. And probably she's about the size of a pillow. She lost 13 inches in length by the estrogen. She got down to 63 pounds. And so she was easier to manipulate and grill around. I was unable to find anything as to what she is today, when she's around 16 or 17. Now, I didn't do a full court led research. I just did a Google. So maybe if I did a real search, I could find something else about her. But that's sort of how that works now. It would have been good if the ethics committee had looked at the principles and did a pro and con weighing as to what was involved. And that would be something that I would hope an ethics committee would do, and not ethics involvement. So, okay, so what are our takeaways here today? Values are the foundation of ethical behavior. There's one enough to have it up there. But know your values. Know what your own values are. They can change, can be destructive, and know them. Know what your own personal values are. Choose a healthy environment at workplace. Know your environment at workplace. Whether that's where you work now, where you'll work in the future, know that. Whether that's your department or your unit, if there's unethical behavior, don't communicate if they don't tell you the truth. Bail out. Don't be a part of what's going on. Next, take the tincture of time. I use tincture just as a word symbol, but tincture itself is when you mix a drug with an alcohol solution or some type of solvent to either ingest or apply or something. But take time when you're looking at an ethical dilemma or an ethical decision for your personal life or your professional life. Most decisions don't have to be done right now. Some do, but take the tincture of time. Sometimes sleeping on it, it's a world of difference. Advocate for what's important. Stand up for what you believe. It may mean you're no longer working in that establishment, and that's okay too. Doing the right thing, you'll have no regrets. I do remember working on evening shift, and I thought a patient really needed the position, and his answering service could not get a hold of him. Tried a couple of times, and I was getting frantic. Other than calling the chief of staff, which was my next step, I called the police. The police could go check on him. Now, Dr. Doolittle came in, and that's not his name, but it's it, and said that his phone wasn't working. But I didn't get reprimanded on that one. But to stand up for what's important, do the right thing. And it's okay to change your mind. Maybe things will evolve, or maybe something will happen along the way, and you can say, I changed my mind. I figured out something, it just was all different. I didn't see it that way, and I was blinded by the light. Okay, it's okay. Incorporate ethics in your own personal decision making. You know, now that just that, incorporate that. Tough decision, think about it. Okay? Ask for help. I just talked to somebody, I think earlier, about Carl Middleton. Carl Middleton is an ethicist, and he has been on speed dial on my phone forever. I chair the ethics committee. I speed dialed him, getting on the plane, and who knows what else he was in the middle of. And I had somebody in Cincinnati and somebody in Salem, Oregon. And boy, I need help. Tell me what you think about this case. And I still need help. As I sit on that committee, and something came up last week, and I need a little help in that consideration. Consider your biases. Biases are like a backpack that's permanently implanted in all of us. And I wish you could leave them at the door. I like to say, leave your bag at the door, but they won't come off. So our biases are coming in with us, whether we want them to or not, as are everybody else's. Now, we like to zip them up real tight and try to keep them in check, but it's best to be aware of what's in your backpack, and so that you're fully knowledgeable. So when you come into a meeting or a group or a class or a presentation or whatever, that you know those, and so you can then deal with them accordingly and not let them overly influence where you're going down that road. And last but not least, ethical decision making may be the most important skill to learn in your life. For change in life, better or worse, occurs at decision points. How great to have tools to do that the right way. So, in closing, little boy and his dad were out flying a kite. Little boy laughed when it soared up in the sky. But he didn't like when his dad would pull on the string and bring it back down. So he told his dad to let it go. His dad cut the string. And it did what the dad thought it would. It soared up into the sky and into the wind currents. Shh, took a nosedive. Well, life is like a kite, and ethics is like a string. Your life can still soar, but ethics is there to help you guide on that soar. And knowing that ethics can help pull that in every now and then to keep you so you don't dive into the ground, but to keep you grounded. Because do ethics really matter? I think they really, really, really matter. And to what do you attribute the remarkable long life of 121 years in Philadelphia? You can barely see the vision. And of course, now in the world, last month, last couple weeks, the oldest living person died. She was a 118-year-old nun in France. And they asked her, you're remarkable. She said, I had wine and chocolate every day. And I said, yeah. So in this picture, I ask, are we prolonging the living or are we prolonging the dying? That to me is what ethics is all about. So I don't know the answers, but I'll certainly be open to questions. And here's my email. You can certainly email me, and I will try to help you find answers. I certainly don't know them, or find you a direction that you can find your answers. So thank you. So, any questions? Yes.
Yeah, something that kind of stuck out to me when, kind of in the beginning, when we were talking about dividing things up equally, and then also dividing that they're different. So what is, kind of explain that just a little bit, like what that means?
Well, what I've used before, the house experiment, is I'm a mother of 3 children, and I'm making a chocolate cake. And this one over here is it's my favorite. I can't wait. I love chocolate. And this is a chocolate cake again. I really want cookies. And this one over here, if he gets near chocolate, he has an anaphylactic shock. So would I give them all the same piece of cake? That would be equal. If I give this one a huge piece, this one an earth piece, this one none, that would be fair and equitable. Does that help?
That's like,
Anything else? I was going to give you this quick case. It said up there how autonomy and beneficence come into conflict. This brought to mind a case that when I was on consult, there was a 57-year-old gentleman who was in the end stage renal failure and needed to go on dialysis. And they needed to put a catheter in here, up here, to start some dialysis treatments. Eventually, he would have probably shunt put into his arms and could get treatment as an outpatient. And he was doing that in radiology to get this put in. Okay. And he had gone down there to sign papers with radiologists and he said, I don't want it. I don't want it. I'm not having it. I don't want it. Okay, so the radiologist said, okay, you don't want it, I'm not gonna do it. Sent him back and called me and said, I said, okay, I'll go talk to him. So I went in and talked to him and I said, Mr. Blah, blah, blah. I said, I understand you don't want this catheter. I don't want it. Why don't you want it? Tell me about it. He said, well, his brother, a dialysis patient, he died and I don't want it. I said, okay, do you know what will happen to you if you don't get this and get dialysis? No. I said, well, your kidneys, they're not working and you're going to build up toxins in your blood. And pretty soon you'll be more and more tired and confused. You'll go into a coma and eventually you're going to die. You don't get this, you're going to die. Okay? All right. Out of the room. A few minutes, I came back. I said, okay, mister, I understand you don't want this catheter. I told you I didn't want it. Autonomy, I want it. Do you know what will happen if you don't get this? No, I don't. I said, if you don't get this, you will die. I asked him, right again, right immediately. Try that one. If you don't get this, do you know what will happen? No, I don't. So he doesn't have the capacity to make that decision. He can't follow that out. He cannot. So he doesn't have that full autonomy. So that's when I said autonomy and beneficence. Beneficence is to do good, to clear up his mind and everything with the dialysis treatment, and then see how he does. And then if he still doesn't want it, okay, we can stop it. So I talked to the doctors. They went ahead with the catheter. He was dialyzed several times in the hospital, put in a permanent. He came back 2 months after some treatment. He came back to the unit and said he's never felt better. This is one case. I have some that don't always go this way. Never felt better. And they asked him if he remembered that he didn't want it. He had no recollection. So that's when autonomy and beneficence can be in conflict. When they talk to you and they make all the sense, but if they can't carry it all the way down that path, so that they know they really get what I'm saying, then you just can't do it. I mean, you just can't go down it. So if he had said, I know that, and I'm okay, are you okay with that? And this has happened. I'm okay with that. Have you come to terms with that? What does that mean for you? Is your life in order? Have you talked to your family? You know, I keep going down, going down. If all that's in order, okay, they don't need to have that catheter put in. They don't need that. Have you thought about where you want to go? And we just work on that. Okay. We have an email. Did you have an email? Okay. Good. Okay.